Chapter 95, Picking Fights, Hanyu's POV. As soon as Antony disappeared behind Lord Theodora's curtain, Hanyu turned his attention back to his companions. Asao was pale and quivering, one hand straying to touch the lump in his robe that covered the strange shark necklace from Thad. Hanyu thought he could guess what had upset his friend. "You shouldn't be so rude to Antony," he scolded Bunta. "He was just asking you a question, and he was perfectly polite." Bunta shrugged, unrepentant. "I answered the question, didn't I?" "And then you acted like he wasn't even there," argued Hanyu. "He already knows I hate him. Why pretend otherwise?" "But surely your lord will be angry if he tells her," Asao managed through trembling lips. "Won't she punish you for your disrespect?" "My lord and I have had our arguments on the subject and finally agreed to disagree regarding Antony," Bunta said, a little sourly. "Now come, won't you sit down? I assume you boys want to see Kenta. I'll go get him." "We're happy to see you too," Hanyu protested, but Bunta was already moving down the curtained corridor. "He didn't mean it, did he?" Asao whispered once the older man was out of sight. "He wouldn't really argue with Lord Theodora." "He probably would," Hanyu shrugged helplessly. "But she wouldn't mind. She's nice. And Antony didn't get mad at him either, you know." Asao's continuing fear of their master bewildered him. It had made sense at first, given the way Marcus had behaved, but surely after more than a week he should be beginning to understand that Antony was different. Why was he still so jumpy? "Why is he so upset with our lord?" Asao was still whispering and glancing around as though he were afraid of being caught asking. "Antony wasn't a very good master to Bunta's lover when he had him." Hanyu felt a little disloyal saying it so bluntly, but Antony had put it in much starker terms himself. "He didn't pay much attention to him, just ate and left him alone the rest of the time. But he knows better now, and he feels awful about it. He won't do that to us." Asao didn't speak again, simply staring down at his hands. Had Hanyu's references to Antony's old mistakes made him nervous? Or angry? Honestly, he looked more angry than frightened, his lips drawn tight and his good hand twitching as though he was resisting the urge to fist it. Damn, Hanyu hadn't expected Asao to be so angry on the former offering's behalf. Now that Bunta had planted the idea, was Asao going to pick a fight with Antony? At least that would show him that nothing bad would happen. He was saved from his worries when Kenta appeared from the makeshift hallway and squirmed into a chair across from them. "Hello, it's good to see you both. Do you know what our masters are talking about? Lord Antony sounded upset." Asao paled further, but Hanyu could only smile. "That's just how he talks. Kenta, tell Asao how you were steering." They'd been talking for quite a while. Even Asao seemed to be relaxing a little, when Hanyu realized that someone else was listening to their conversation. Gyuri hovered at the edge of the room, arms folded across her chest and face impassive. When did she get there? Hanyu couldn't help sneaking glances at her. He had never seen anyone who looked so much like they came from the desert, all harsh, unforgiving lines. Even dressed in Taishan robes, her formerly gaunt frame beginning to fill out a little, she still had the air of a wild, thorny plant. "Talk at me, or look only," she snapped, and Hanyu realized he'd been caught. Kenta, who was sitting with his back to her, whirled in his seat. "Gyuri, come on, sit down. These are my friends, Hanyu and Asao." He sounded utterly delighted to see her. Hanyu just couldn't understand it. There truly was no accounting for taste. She took a few steps towards the table, then hesitated. She seemed to be looking just next to Hanyu, at Asao. Her eyes narrowed. The next moment, she darted across the room with a speed that would have astonished Hanyu if he hadn't spent the last months watching gods flicker from one place to the next in an instant. Dropping into a crouch with her back pressed to the wall beside the door to the hallway, she looked around herself wildly. "Gyuri? What's wrong?" Kenta asked, stumbling to his feet. She spat a few words in what must have been Sergish. The language was strangely lyrical. Somehow, Hanyu had always imagined that it would be harsh and guttural. "Where?" she finally hissed, still staring all around. "He is where?" "Who?" Kenta knelt beside her, all concerned softness, and she scowled at him. She pointed at Asao and seemed to grasp for words, her face twisting with frustration. Big one! Big God! His big God! He is where? Hanyu and Kenta sat stupefied, but finally Asao himself spoke up. Lord Marcus, he whispered, his voice so soft that neither Kenta nor Gyuri seemed to hear. She means Lord Marcus. Marcus? Hanyu was not nearly so quiet, and Asao flinched. He tried to lower his tone. Sorry, but she knows Marcus? Of course, Kenta slapped his own forehead. He's the one who caught her. I should have thought of it. Oh, right. Marcus had tried to trade Gyuri for Kenta. How could Hanyu have forgotten? Kenta looked at Gyuri and shook his head, speaking clearly. He is not here. Asao belongs to Lord Antony now. She squinted, and he repeated himself patiently while she mouthed the words much less patiently. Hanyu couldn't imagine the frustration of trying to learn a new language, reduced to a child's vocabulary while everyone chattered easily around her. He turned back to Asao, not wanting to make things worse by staring while she fumbled. I didn't know you two had met. My old master kept her in his room the day after the battle before bringing her to Lord Theodora the next day, Asao replied stiffly. We saw each other, but we weren't exactly introduced. Really? Hanyu's mind turned back over old conversations and dragged his mouth in its wake, as usual. But you said Marcus used you after the battle, that he was rough. Do you mean he had her there watching? Well, fucking drop it, Hanyu, Asao snarled. Startled, already regretting his foolish words, Hanyu met his gaze. Asao's face was very pale, muscles twitching at his jaw, and for the first time, Hanyu wondered if his friend might hit him. Good. Maybe that would teach him some manners, some common sense. Tears sprang up alongside his sudden, sickening remorse. Oh, Asao, I'm so sorry, he cried. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean... Hanyu, the other man grated out. I said to drop it. Hanyu dropped it. They were still sitting in uncomfortable silence, Kenta and Gyuri sorting futilely through words by the door, when their master reappeared. Antony looked tired and even grimmer than usual. Still, Hanyu couldn't help smiling at the way his hair glittered in the torchlight. The god could grumble all he liked, but it was true. He looked good when he sparkled. He? Gyuri cried, pointing at Antony. Sorry, my lord, Kenta stammered, dropping into a bow. She means, I've been trying to tell her that Asao is yours now, but without Theo to translate... Gyuri didn't even seem to consider joining Kenta in his obeisance, instead regarding Antony with a cool contempt that would have made Bunta proud. Not big god? Antony is little god, she observed. Asao, for his part, had squirmed free of his chair to make his own bow. Hanyu considered joining him, but, like Gyuri, he was simply too interested in everything that was going on to willingly sacrifice his ability to see it. He didn't think Lord Theodora would mind. Gyuri let loose a furious stream of Sergish, her whole face relaxing as she spoke a language she knew fluently. Lord Theodora answered almost as rapidly, then turned to the rest of them to translate. She saw Asao and assumed Marcus was here. I explained that Asao and Hanyu both live with Antony now. She asked whether you are very unimportant, Antony, since you only have 2 humans with you. Antony snorted. Your crowd has given her a skewed view on how things work around here. Hanyu, Asao, are you ready to return to our oh-so-lowly dwellings? They bade the others farewell and left, Gyuri watching them warily the whole time. Hanyu tried to restrain his questions until they reached their own rooms, but he only made it a few steps. The Sergish woman's bright, baleful eyes and her pale hair, so much more like his own than any he'd seen before, stirred up too many thoughts. Antony? Asao's flinch reminded him that he should have said my lord since they were out of the rooms. Still, no one was in the hall just then. You said you made your agreement with the Taishans because they were the first people you met? Antony glanced up at him, less surprised than Hanyu would have expected him to be at the sudden questions. That's right. They took us in after we killed the sea servant. So, if the Sergish people had found you first, You would have driven us away from the fertile land, not them? Antony's lips tightened. Yes, I suppose we would. Yuri was so thin when she first got here, Hanyu mused. Are they all like that? Sometimes. Antony tugged open the door and gestured them through. Here we are. Asao folded down at Antony's feet to remove his boots. Hanyu was dimly aware that he ought to help, but he couldn't bring himself to let the conversation go. But, he began, only for Antony to interrupt him. Can't we discuss this later? Snapped the god. It's been a very long day, and I'm tired. Thank you, Asao. I am grateful to be of service, Asao murmured, stooping to press his lips to their master's feet, then scooting backwards. Antony stared down at him for a moment, looking worried. Then he glanced at Hanyu and looked more worried still. Finally, he closed his eyes, sighed, and announced, I don't know about you two, but I need some sleep. Hanyu gasped. You're coming back to bed, right? You promised. Only if you're both comfortable with it. Antony crouched down, reached a hand towards Asao's shoulder, then withdrew it. Asao, please don't be polite. I need to know the truth. Will you be able to sleep if I'm in the bed? Asao's already prostrate form curled more tightly upon itself, and Hanyu ached to hug him. My lord, you do not need your servant's permission to sleep in your own bed. My lord has been more than generous, allowing my unworthy... I promise I won't touch you, Antony interrupted. We'll stick Hanyu in the middle. And that was exactly what he did. When they were all dressed in their nightclothes and finished with their ablutions, Hanyu lay in the middle of the bed with his best friend on one side and his beloved master on the other. It was a little cramped, and both of the other men were tense as harpstrings, but it was also wonderful. Hanyu had sworn to himself that he would be respectful, but as soon as Antony slipped under the blanket, all his resolutions dissolved in a great rush of joy. Ignoring Asao's stuttering gasp, he rolled over, curled himself around the god's small, stiff figure, and buried his face in Antony's hair. As soon as he breathed in the familiar scent of seawater and lemon, Hanyu's whole body relaxed. Missed you, Hanyu whispered against his master's ear. He almost drew back in surprise when Antony gave a sudden violent shiver in his arms. When the god's pale eyes met his, there was a strange, searching intensity in them that Hanyu had never seen before. Antony? He asked, half afraid. Hanyu, whispered Antony. He stopped. Hanyu waited, more bewildered with every passing heartbeat. Asao's breaths came quick and nervous at his back, but he couldn't manage to take a breath of his own. Antony kept him trapped in that avid stare for a long, frozen moment. Then the god rolled over, pressing his back to Hanyu's chest and hiding his face. Good night, he said abruptly. Sleep well, both of you. We'll all be busy soon. Theo says we'll be arriving at the island tomorrow night.